Okay, so I'll jump right in. Thank you for inviting us to speak today. Again, I'm sorry about the technical problems. So my name is Danielle Palmer. I'm a postdoc in the Department of Animal and Plant Sciences at University of Sheffield. My co-presenters are Nicola Hemmings and Frane Babarovich. So we're really excited today to share our experience over the past few months of working to re-envision our curriculum and our research practices. Oops. Sorry, one second. Okay, so just to give you an overview of what we'll present today, I'll give some background on how our group formed and our influences and our workflow. Then Nick will go into a bit more depth about changes to teaching that she's been leading, specifically in animal behavior. And then finally, Frane will present on how he's approached this work as a PhD student. So just to give you a bit of background about my identity and positionality in approaching this work, I'm a white Chilean-American cisgendered woman. I'm bicultural and bilingual. I have several privileges. So coming from a middle-class background, having educated parents, and having these two science degrees that give me certain credibility in different spaces, academic spaces. My exposure and awareness come from growing up living in different countries, also visiting family in Chile. My mother's story of immigrating to the US, and other examples of sacrifice and mutual support within my family. And then having to just navigate different spaces and question my sense of belonging. So in different countries and then in science and academia as well. And together those things lead to my commitment to personally and professionally work to advance equity in society and enact change in institutions of higher education. And so my subsequent actions are involvement in diversity and equity work, like the things I'll share with you today, mentorship of younger generations, and engaging in research and teaching from a critical viewpoint. So our work stems from student and community-led calls to confront racism in equity and inequity in society and in higher education specifically.
Sorry, Daniela, I think you can only see like the top half of your slides. I'm not sure what's going on there. Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. Can you still see it in full?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So many of you will be familiar with movements like Roads Must Fall and Why is My Curriculum White? And oftentimes people respond to this and say that it doesn't apply to science because the sciences are objective. But I hope we can show you with some examples how every field is shaped by the identities, histories, and societies that individuals belong to. And science is really no exception to that. So we formed a reading group in early 2019, made up of students and staff, to begin to educate ourselves about these movements and what it would look like to transform our institution and our fields of study from a critical perspective. So we read this book, Decolonising the University, which probably a lot of you are familiar with, but I highly recommend it to anyone that hasn't picked it up yet. And so I want to share with you a general but critical example of how our field of ecology and evolution is no exception from this conversation. So our field is founded upon natural history, which is a term that brings to mind these famous explorer types traveling around the world. And what we're often, or typically not taught in evolution and ecology classes, is that Darwin and these other heroes profited directly from slavery, imperialism, and colonialism. And these are just a few ways in which that relationship unfolded. So they had access to land and biodiversity in colonized places. Their exploration was actually directly motivated by imperial interests like prospecting for resources or land, or just collecting, exotic kind of organisms. The theft, appropriation, and erasure of local knowledge and objects, and their travel aboard slave ships. And as Ray Wynne Grant says, for them to participate in this institution, they had to believe science was more important than Black life. Saying that they did it for access is eliminating their responsibility. But these realities are rarely acknowledged at the curriculum level. And decolonizing the curriculum isn't just for the curriculum's sake, although that is a critical aspect of it. So Tuck and Yang say decolonization brings about the repatriation of indigenous land and life. It is not a metaphor for other things we want to do to improve our societies and schools. And in our own department, we have a natural history museum. Many of you have probably visited one somewhere. And it's worth making the point that these specimens were taken from somewhere and lives were taken in the name of science to build museums like this one. So our challenge is also to address this injustice and work to yield power to those that have been exploited and dispossessed. And I believe that acknowledging this history and these realities in our curriculum is a critical first step toward these material goals. So our reading group transitioned into a working group where we've been developing resources for our department. So we put together a PDF guide that lays out this framework and ways to apply it to teaching and research. It includes priority areas in the curriculum that we think should be revisited. It provides, or it talks about providing context for some of the famous people, also recommending lecturers, teachers to avoid hero worship and paying attention to these big names while overlooking kind of more community and collaborative contributions. We also include examples of overlooked or excluded people that haven't become part of the curriculum and ways to highlight the work that they have done or were prevented from doing. And this guide is an ongoing process of revision that we're gathering feedback on and continuing to improve. And we're also in the process of assembling a student-led group to critically assess what's currently in the curriculum so we can address any problems and hopefully build something better. And finally, we've been delivering workshops within our department to communicate the work we've been doing. So our department is divided into 4 research clusters based on different research themes, and we've developed cluster-specific content to best reach each of those groups with examples that are relevant to them. So our plan is to engage in these ongoing discussions and make this an official part of departmental conversations and work. And now Nick will present in more depth about the teaching that she's been working on in animal behavior.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Nicola Hemmings. I'm a researcher and lecturer in evolution and behaviour in the same department as Daniela. I'm part of the Decolonising working group. I've also been involved in widening participation and access initiatives for the past 10 years or so. And my involvement in this kind of work is motivated primarily through my own experience as someone who came into higher education myself through a widening participation route. And I guess that combined with a kind of developing an understanding of how being white has facilitated the transition from a working class first generation background into academia for me. And I'm particularly interested in how different aspects of our identity, such as class, race, and gender, intersect to influence how different people experience that transition and how we can make the system more equitable and inclusive for everyone. And this is part of it. So I'm going to tell you about how we started applying the decolonising framework to teaching and learning in our department at a practical level. And I'm going to focus on my own topics, but We have been doing this broadly across the department as well. However, we did identify evolutionary biology as one of our priority areas for attention, and this is because the history of evolutionary biology and genetics is entwined with European imperialism, racism, and white supremacy. Many prominent evolutionary biologists and geneticists who helped establish the field were racists and eugenicists, and their theories served as justification for slavery, mass slaughter, and the establishment of the racist structures that pervade our society today. And if you want to learn more about this, I strongly recommend reading Angela Saini's book, Superior, The Return of Race Science, which is a great book, but it's a painful lesson in just how unobjective science is capable of being. Now, the need to confront these issues when teaching subjects like evolutionary genetics is clear. There's a direct, tangible link between the colonial and racist context within which that work was done and its terrible outcomes. What's perhaps less straightforward is when we move away from a subject that has been so obviously shaped by colonialism and imperialism and into areas where, on the face of it, these issues are less pervasive. But in some ways, these sorts of subjects provide a really good demonstration of how applying a decolonial framework can be important and beneficial for all our teaching beyond those really obvious problematic subjects. Oh, Daniela, sorry, could you just skip on to the, yeah, thank you. So an example of such a subject that is one that I am most heavily involved with teaching in Sheffield, and that is animal behaviour. And I'm going to give you a brief overview of 3 key approaches that I've taken to applying the decolonising framework to our animal behaviour curriculum. The first is very simple. So this is just simply doing a systematic audit of the curriculum with respect to diversity and representation. It's very quick and straightforward to do, and it's totally not sufficient to do just this, but it's nonetheless an important starting point. So I look specifically at gender and ethnicity of researchers who are highlighted in animal behaviour lectures, and they were almost entirely white and from Europe and the US, and about 75% were men. And just as an example, the history of the study of animal behaviour is entirely accredited to 3 men, Nico Tinbergen, Konrad Lorenz and Carl von Frisch, and these people are routinely described as having founded the field in the mid-1900s. Now, these people were crucial within the field, Nico Tinbergen in particular, and he has an incredible backstory himself. He was imprisoned by the Nazis for 2 years during World War II for protesting against the removal of Jewish scholars from Leiden University. But despite the importance of these 3 people to the field, it is wrong to suggest that they are the only people who should be deemed important in the history of animal behaviour. Our historical perspective requires a broader exploration of our earlier ideas that contributed to their thinking. So, for example, an excellent paper published earlier this year by Dr. Danielle Lee provided an account of Charles Henry Turner. So he was an African-American scientist. He was a pioneer in the study of animal behaviour way back in the early 1900s, before the field was even properly recognised, some 50 years before Tinbergen wrote his key works. And his story as a black man who received he was the first to receive his PhD from the University of Chicago, and that was just 42 years after the end of slavery in the US. It's a really important one to reflect upon in terms of who has and hasn't been allowed to gain recognition and create knowledge and legacies in science. The challenges he faced, including having little to no access to labs, libraries, or job opportunities due to segregation laws, meant that he was severely restricted in his ability to do research and to produce academic progeny. Now, before I go on, I just want to stress how important it is to do a systematic audit of the curriculum. So, for example, in terms of the gender bias that I found, I was surprised because I thought we'd already achieved good gender representation in our content before this. I felt like I personally talked about women researchers quite a lot in my own lectures. Maybe I felt like I had better representation of women than I actually did, because I'm used to hearing about the work of women much more rarely than even that. Now, as I said, the solutions are straightforward. We're now actively identifying and highlighting people from more diverse backgrounds, providing a wider range of perspectives, and talking about people whose contributions to the field have been excluded or ignored. And that includes not only practicing scientists who we know about and whose contributions have been largely overlooked, like Charles Henry Turner, but also Indigenous people whose traditional cultural knowledge has been extensively extracted and exploited by Western researchers without credit. So that's the easy stuff. We can all do an audit and a bit of research to diversify the curriculum. But I think the decolonial approach is not just about counting how many people from different backgrounds are included in your lectures. It's about asking, how does your curriculum train students to think critically about the information they're receiving? And for me, this is the really exciting and enriching part of the process, and it feeds into the inclusive approaches to learning that I've been interested in since the beginning of my teaching career. Now, one thing that looking at my teaching content with this decolonising framework in mind has revealed is that in general, the current ways that we teach and study animal behaviour are almost exclusively underpinned by classical Western thinking. And if we take it a step further and accept, as I think most people who study animal behaviour would, that we tend to project human notions of behavioural norms onto animals, then it follows that what we're actually projecting are Eurocentric human notions of behavioural norms. We're totally biased about how we expect animals to behave and why. So we need to develop not just what we teach, but the way that we teach it, to encourage students to explicitly consider how this Eurocentric view might influence and limit our ability to fully understand animal behaviour. I think it's really important to challenge how biases underpin our perceptions of behaviour. And I've been really inspired by the work of Dr. Ambika Kamarth in particular. She studies territorial behaviour in animals, and her recent theoretical work challenges the use of territoriality as a framework for understanding behaviour. She highlights how it's founded upon human notions of property and ownership that don't really apply very well to non-human animals. And we're so often interpreting animal behaviour based on what we think animals should be doing, and that's based on our own perspective of how things work, rather than releasing ourselves from those constraints and looking at what they actually are doing. Now, there's several other examples of traditional frameworks for thinking about behaviour that have been similarly challenged in the last couple of years, and I think these provide a fantastic opportunity to engage students in current debates in the field, encourage deep critical thinking, and create a stimulating forum for discussion and active learning. And this leads on to the third crucial step in this process, which is adopting a student-led approach. And our active learning, which is centered around things like self-directed research and group discussion. This has been evidence to widen participation and engagement with learning across diverse groups of people. There are some controversial topics in the field of behavioural ecology, and these can really lend themselves to this kind of learning approach. So, for example, the field of sociobiology, which introduced to the mainstream ideas about human nature being adaptive. This was the subject of a major debate in the 1970s. From many people's perspective, sociobiology serves to naturalise things like racism, aggression, and sexism. And although proponents of the field insist their work is objective, they often miss the point that there is a historical trend of social policy being influenced by shaky theories about human nature, and these should therefore be treated with extreme care. Now, reflecting on that debate and the social context at the time provides an opportunity to explore the politics of science and scientists themselves, and I hope this will encourage students to think critically and form their own opinions on that matter. So I hope you can see from what I've presented here that this approach isn't about removing ideas and identities, and it's not a simple process of diversification, but instead it's a process of enriching the curriculum and the learning experience for students, and encouraging students to develop their own ideas and ultimately free themselves of those ingrained biases that pervade the field. Now, as Daniela mentioned before, we've been leading these workshops with other staff in our department, and I led one of those earlier this year. The overall response was fairly receptive and positive. We're always up against it a little bit when we're asking people to spend more time developing their teaching content, but I stand firm that that's not only our duty, but it will also pay us back many times in terms of student outcomes and ultimately the next generations of scientists that we get to work with. And many of our colleagues really get this. Several have already provided examples of ways that they're doing this. There has, however, been a bit of resistance. One staff member commented that we should be focusing on the science. It's not a sociology degree. Another said that they didn't want to bring politics into their science. However, we argue that science is inherently political. We shouldn't ignore that context. So rather than bringing politics into it, it's actually a case of not ignoring or avoiding the fact it's there. And in addition, we know our students are motivated by these sorts of issues and questions. So this is therefore an opportunity for engagement. And that brings me to the end of my section. I'll just finish by saying that as a member of teaching staff, I obviously have some control over what goes into the curriculum and the learning environment that is provided for the students that I teach. And some of you who are listening might not yet be in that position yet. For example, if you're currently a student yourself. However, students may have different routes to apply in the decolonial framework. And I'm delighted to now pass over to Frane, who's a PhD researcher studying in the same department as me. And he's going to give us some more insight into that.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Frane Babarovic, he, him. And thank you for joining us and listening to our talks today. So when I was offered to give a talk today, besides the fact I was really happy, I was thinking how to start it. And then I read this I really like this sentence that's actually the description of this conference. This online conference for students, officers, and staff seek to draw on a knowledge from inside and outside the sector to equip you with the framework, understanding, and tactics you need to decolonize the curriculum. First, I highlighted the students because I am a PhD student at University of Sheffield, Animal and Plant Sciences. Second, it kind of shows that this type of work is both theoretical activism and activist theory. You need to draw one from another. And third, I really like this framework, understanding, and tactics, because I believe that through those three words, I can actually show you what took me to give you this talk today, what brought me here. Next slide, please. Thank you. So first, let's begin with framework. I want to kind of tell you that this is my frame and my work. And what I mean by framework is actually understanding that in the end, I will be the one who will produce my science. I mean, I knew that, but I did not know what it brings, what it brings with it. So a bit about my background. I finished molecular biology at Department of Biology, University of Zagreb in Croatia, after which I enrolled Women's Studies at Center for Women's Studies in Zagreb. And these two literally types of studies were quite different for me. Molecular biology taught me that whatever I'm doing, it's really objective, truthful, and methods and materials I use, I should not question them and they're correct. On the other hand, after enrolling in women's studies, I decided to finish the degree on the topic of Darwinian feminism or feminist critique of Darwin, which actually taught me how much the theory can be inherently, in that case, can be misogynic and sexist. And these two separate courses of my education helped me to frame what I'm today, to understand that science is never apolitical And that actually by saying, let's not bring politics to science, you are leaving it in a certain way. You are leaving it to be political, but in another direction that you want to bring in. So in our case, curriculum, for example, which was built on biology, that was produced by people throughout history on colonial legacies, it is colonial. That's why we bring these new frameworks that we discussed today. And second, this was both professional and private journey of my own. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the second is understanding. And let's move on a few years later, where I became PhD student at University of Sheffield, Animal and Plant Sciences, but I'm also a member of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee at our department. Part of the committee at one point, maybe a bit more than a year ago, started reading this group that Daniela told you more about. And I really got caught on it. I really started understanding, as the main word tells you, and seeing the curriculum and science we are doing in a different way. So this is a picture of me collecting data for my PhD at one point, really briefly, but it's a picture of me in a museum of a white European man holding that bird from New Zealand. And this will be the resource or the capital on which I will build my career. And before going through this understanding of the colonial framework, I would never critically observe this. But at the same time, I need to be constantly aware of constraints of funding, career stage, and time limits, in a sense, extrinsic constraints, because I am still a PhD student. I have 4 years to finish my degree, and there's certain amount of time I have to produce the critical framework that I'm using and to try to include it in my PhD thesis, to produce that new knowledge. And why doing all of this? Well, personally, I feel like and I started from a personal perspective here, I feel like in 2020, everything we do can have a root to some sort of colonial legacies. So I feel like it's almost like my moral obligation. And second, I'm really interested in epistemological level of all of this. What will be the new epistemologies that we as researchers in biology will develop when we apply these frameworks? Next slide, please. And finally, last one is tactics. So I told you framework, it's me producing science, understanding the colonial narratives, and now tactics, what I can actually do about this. So as I try to show you, I first tried to decolonize my mind, then develop approach to your specific research topic. In my case, when I looked through my thesis and my plan of work and the amount of time I have, it was like, okay, let's focus on museum work. Then following that, I could have maybe gone back to museum and do some more data collection of where specimens come from and do some more statistical analysis on it. But I decided to read more theory and give a reflective point on museums. For that purpose, I read from some journals I would never even thought about reading before, and authors that I would maybe never encounter before, for which I'm really, really thankful. Utility of your work. By this, I mean that when we do this new type of research, we are with this new type of frameworks, we are entering institution and its practices that were built during colonialism. For example, on again, I say extrinsic factors in my case, my small scale, how I feel about all of this is, and utility of my work, I will maybe leave it as open question for all PhD students. If you write something, what to do with it? This is PhD in biology. Should I put it as critical reflective point in introduction, maybe just a paragraph, entire part of introduction or separate chapter of my thesis? Whom and how to convince in this, we know how we produce science today, who and how to convince that this is publishable work, or is it, or should it even be? So these are all the questions that I still leave open, and I answer them as I go through them. That being said, take your work out of your critical friend group. I notice any equality, diversity, and inclusion type of committee stuff that I attend conference, there's always like-minded people there. What I think it's crucial is to bring this work outside of those circles, to maybe start reading groups of your own at your own departments, within your own lab research groups, for example, in biology departments. And we also started recently a plan how to gather several PhD students that are thinking about doing something same like this and discussing how to include this in our thesis. And finally, step back when needed. I was really happy to be able to present to you today, but I'm still really, really aware I'm a white European man giving you talk, and that my life background and circumstances definitely at one point benefited from colonial legacies, and as a European definitely. And I think by this stepping back when needed is literally not taking space or talking about topics if there are people and their own perspectives which have for whom these entire frameworks will be more beneficial. And that's what I wanted to say. Yeah, thank you, Daniela. And finally, thank you all for listening. To learn more, please visit our webpage and download our new guide. Also, feel free to email us. We sent out our guide on several different locations around University of Sheffield to give critical feedback on our on what we have written. If you have any comments on our today talk, we are really open for discussion. And today we are presenting just 3 of us, but this all work that you can hear today were months and months of weekly meetings among people mentioned here. And yeah, we would like also to thank all of them. And that's all from me. You can shoot the questions.
Thank you so much, guys. If you're in the audience, there should be a little like Q&A button or a chat button where you can put any questions that you might have in the chat. But just while people are typing, that was a really interesting talk. As someone who like absolutely doesn't come from the sciences, I thought you did a really good job of bringing us along for the ride with you, and really providing a excellent case study of how like, the sciences absolutely can be decolonized, even to kind of an extent that I hadn't quite realized, which was really interesting. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you again for inviting us to share.
Just while people are thinking as well, I thought the section on animal behavior and territoriality I thought was really interesting, and I suppose one thing that kind of really rung true with me was the idea that actually if you're kind of like trying to see human behavior in these animals, like if you're kind of that's your frame of reference, then there's actually a risk that you then are also reinforcing that human behavior in itself. Like but by saying, oh, animals are territorial like we are, you can then almost say to yourself, and actually being territorial is natural because we see it in animals, and it's almost becomes like cyclical.
Yeah, exactly. I think that there is a real kind of issue with this, like viewing behavior, and I think this is, you can think about it between humans and animals, so viewing animal behavior in the same way you might view human behavior, but then obviously we can take it to the next level and kind of think about how we view behavior of people in the Western world, and then applying that across other parts of the world as well. And so I think these things are interlinked, and I think it's just all about entrenched biases actually, and just how we think things should be. So it comes back to what our own worldview is, how we think things work. It's almost impossible actually to get that out of your head, but you kind of have to be conscious of it. And especially if you're studying something like animal behavior, you have to be really aware of how those biases can affect not just how you interpret, say, for example, your results, but even the questions you ask in the first place and the way you go about doing your research. I mean, even in terms of the methods you use to do your research, you can be biasing kind of every step along the way because of this kind of frame that you have for thinking about how things should be.
Yeah, definitely. So we've started to get some questions through now. We've had one from Penny at Exeter Students' Union that asked, what inspired you to start this work? Was it student demand, or particular projects or people? Like where did you get started on this?
I think many of us had already been involved with other diversity, equity oriented things, activities. This just felt like, well, for me personally, it felt like sort of a new area to learn about. And yeah, wanting to do that with a group of people. So we just kind of self-assembled, I guess. But there have been, on the student side, I know there have been efforts going on as well. And I think now we're just starting to kind of converge and really bridge between the undergraduate students and sort of what our group has been doing. I don't know if anyone else has something to add about that specifically.
All I was going to add is that just kind of after, so we'd been doing this group for a while, and then there was an open letter written by students at our university this summer, calling for the university to start making these kinds of changes. And we've just been really fortunate to be able to link up with some of the students who are involved with that open letter and the movement behind that. And they are now starting to work with us this semester. And obviously they're the ones who are in the lectures, they're the ones who are receiving this content. And yeah, so we're really kind of fortunate that they're going to be working with us and informing us and giving us feedback on how our efforts are actually playing out, you know, in their learning spaces.
Right, excellent, thank you. I've had a question from Emma, who says, can I ask if the time that you spent to decolonize the curriculum was funded by your department? If so, how did you make the argument for funding and time to be allocated to this?
It has not been funded. I guess we didn't really pursue that. We could have, but at first it started as reading and discussion. So we just, you know, volunteered and wanted to spend our time doing it. Although I think being compensated is really, really important. On the student side, though, I know there has been like an internship position created to support a student who's leading the curriculum audit. So hopefully that's a first step. There should definitely be more, but yeah, it's a great question.
Awesome, thank you. I'm afraid we are now out of time. I'm gonna have to start prepping for the next session. But there are a couple of people who still have questions unanswered, but I think most of you are on Twitter or accessible elsewhere. So if people want to ask questions or follow up, I'm sure we'd be happy to answer via those forms. So,
yeah, please send us an email anytime.
Awesome. But once again, thank you so much for coming along and joining us at our conference. This has been a really, really interesting session, and as I said before, a really valuable case study. Yeah, the session was being recorded, so we'll make sure we send the link out when that's all out and available. And yeah, thanks for everyone who came and put forward such excellent questions as well. Thanks.
Thank you.